Hello, everyone. United Way of Greater Toledo is excited to present the third webinar of our new donor education series, the 2020 Census and Why It Should Matter to You. United Way believes when donors are empowered, we have the best chance to drive positive community change. And that is what these series are all about, informing and empowering you with knowledge. Along with today's webinar highlighting the census process, we've had two other webinars, including using data to drive your giving decisions and the truth about nonprofit overhead. All of our webinars are offered with your flexibility in mind and are recorded so that they can be accessed at a later time. You can access the recordings via our website, www.unitedwaytoledo.org, on our new donor education page. Please help us spread the word and share our past and any future presentations with others. Now, let's get started. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Lucas Stahl. Lucas is the Manager of Public Affairs and Advocacy at United Way of Greater Toledo. He is passionate about the nonprofit sector and its ability to bring together a diverse array of thinkers to create positive outcomes. By empowering and educating donors and volunteers about their role within the world of public policy and advocacy, Lucas believes we can create real, long-lasting health and human service change. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Take it away, Lucas.
Thanks, Kate. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Lucas Stahl. I'm the Manager of Public Affairs and Advocacy for United Way of Greater Toledo. I'm chatting with you all today because a significant part of my job is being an educational resource to our donors, volunteers, and elected officials when it comes to policy issues that impact the thousands of individuals we serve across Lucas, Wood, and Ottawa County. So that being said, today we're going to jump into a discussion on the upcoming 2020 census. If you're like me, 2020 seems like this distant, futuristic year that exists in some galaxy far, far away. But to our dismay, 2020 will be here in less than 6 months. With that comes our country's next decennial, which is a fun word, census. And hopefully we're all already somewhat familiar with what the census is from a basic standpoint. The 2020 census goes live on April 1st, and there are some significant technological changes that are going to be impacting us next year that our community definitely should be aware of. But for today, we're going to get a little background info on the census because I nerd out on history, so we'll see if you do too. We'll talk about some terminology associated with the census that you'll probably start hearing as we get closer and closer to April 1st. And last but not least, we're all here today because we want to make a positive impact in our community. So we'll go over some next steps on census advocacy that you can be part of. So why do we do this thing called a census? Some of you may not know this, but the census is actually something legally mandated in the US Constitution. Under Article 1, Section 2, for all my constitutional law folks tuning in today, the country's founders set a super ambitious goal in counting every person living in the nation. This count, most importantly, would determine representation in the US Congress based on population, which the census still does today. And as our country aged, the census would go on to determine a slew of other things in our society. So I know we're all thinking yet, what is a presentation without an Oprah meme? Anyways, we can take the census. When we take the census, we'll fill out things like how old we are, how many people are living in our home, what their ages are, what city and state we reside in, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what all that information does is give the federal government a sense of how much money for each state in the US it should be allocating for social service programming and infrastructure development. For example, how can the federal government give the state of Ohio money for something like Early Head Start if it doesn't know how many children are actually living in our state? Because we can't give money out evenly to every single state. I mean, I'm no geographer, but California and Texas are a lot bigger and have more folks living in them than states like Rhode Island or Hawaii. So we need a system that can accurately assess our populations, and that's a census. And yes, you're reading that number right. Based on the 2010 census, Ohio leveraged $21 billion from the federal government. If you do some quick math, that's about $2 billion every year for critical health and human service programming, which we'll get into right now. So here's that $21 billion breakdown. We have $11 billion for Medicaid, $2.5 billion for SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, $2 billion for Medicare Part B, $565 million for educational title dollars, $557 million for Section 8 housing, $459 million for Section 8 housing payment assistance. But that's not all, we're still going here. $431 million in special education grants, $350 million for the National School Lunch Program, $342 million for CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program, $323 million for Head Start and Early Head Start, $204 million for foster care, $164 million for WIC, which is the nutrition program for women, infants, and children. And just a few more so I can catch my breath here. So $148 million for low-income energy assistance, $130 million for childcare and development funding, and $122 million for health center programming. So that is the end of my very extensive list, again, outlining all of the money allocated to the state of Ohio, our local communities, because of return data from the census. But wait, there's more. If you heard of all those programs that I just listed and thought to yourself, well, I don't use any of those things, nor do I have a need for them. Our assumption is, your assumption is that the census maybe doesn't impact me or it doesn't have an impact on my life. So let's throw in roads here. Yes, road and infrastructure are also impacted by the census. How do we know if there's importance to highway planning here in Northwest Ohio if we have no idea as to how many folks are living here? The smaller the population, or the smaller the population is perceived to be, the less need for robust infrastructure. Because why would the federal government give an abundance of infrastructure dollars to a state where they thought there were less commuters or less vehicular traffic? So when I say that the census impacts us all, it truly does. It even impacts your commute to work. So, okay, we're going to get into our first listener poll and ask you all, of these programs that you just heard, what honestly surprised you the most? So what number really made your eyes widen? And there will be a few answers that auto-propagate here, so you can select one that you found most surprising. Okay, we're getting in some answers here. A lot of folks are saying foster care was something really surprising. All right, I think we may have most everyone in. So foster care was the most surprising number that folks saw. Infrastructure, again, seemed to be a close second. So these are, again, some programs that we don't always realize or recognize as being dollars that are being leveraged by our returned census data. So we're going to get out of this poll really fast and go on to the next slide. So even though the census comes every 10 years, this census has a lot of changes in comparison to years past. 2020 will mark the first year the census will be going digital. The US Census Bureau actually has a goal to receive 55% of all census responses digitally. So you may think, well, how are they going to get folks to actually respond digitally? Well, I'm so glad you asked. According to the Bureau, this year, folks should receive a paper mailer with a unique code for your household. What you'll do is then follow the link also present on the mailer, type in your code, and take the census. The Bureau says that 95% of households in the US will receive their census invite via the mail, which has their unique online code, and about 5% will be visited personally by a census taker. And that's for folks who reside in very rural areas or who don't receive their mail at their home, such as it being delivered to a PO box. We all know that previously you'd be mailed a census document, fill it out, mail it back, but this year answers will be primarily submitted via the web with additional options to respond over the phone, or there also is the option to respond by mail if you so choose. So there are obvious concerns with the census going in a digital direction. What does this mean for folks who don't have access to tech or smart devices? What does this mean for individuals who live in communities that lack strong internet connection? But despite this, in every census, there is always the fear of an undercount. And at this point in the presentation, after going through some of those big dollar amounts, you can understand the validity behind that fear of not getting accurate data back from the census. The lower our count, the less money we have coming back into our neighborhoods. But as mentioned, low counts could stem from the digital divide or a myriad of other things like technological distrust, government distrust, or simply not knowing the value or importance of the census. One of the most surprising examples of undercounting in our communities are actually children. This is a historical undercounted demographic. We do a really bad job of counting kids in the census, especially those under the age of 5, which is really concerning with the census leveraging so much for programs like Early Head Start, foster care, WIC, and CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program. So the Children's Defense Fund in Columbus estimates that 38% of young children here in our city are at risk of not being counted, which is a huge chunk of our population. Those percents are even higher in poverty-stricken neighborhoods, complex households, or non-traditional family structures. As you can see via the graphic on the right side of your screen, young Black and Hispanic children were missed twice as often in the 2010 census in comparison to white children. In 2010 alone, 2.2 million young children across the nation were missed by the census. So again, what does this mean for our social programs or their ability to meet the needs of our community when they don't have an accurate understanding of their population? Or in layman's terms, how can we properly serve our community if we have no idea how many people we need to or could serve? So here's another graphic from the Children's Defense Fund on the counties in the state of Ohio and their census response rates. You can see that Lucas County and Wood County are in the light blue, so 76 to 80% response rate, still 20%-ish of our population completely missed. And Ottawa County was a bit lower with 58 to 75% response rate. Okay, so aside from roads, as philanthropists, and let's be honest, taxpayers, what does a low count mean to you directly? So this is a pretty staggering number. It's estimated that for every person not counted in the census, it'll cost the state of Ohio about $1,814 per person per year for 10 years. Now, over a 10-year period, do the quick math, that's $18,140. Just because folks aren't counted in the census doesn't mean their needs go away. That's where we as philanthropists and donors come into play, or sometimes have to cover that ground. So don't get too jealous of my super technical graphic design skills, but nonetheless, this graphic gets the message across. I personally view nonprofit entities as being a bridge over the gaps in health and human services. In times of need, individuals can indeed lean on public supported programs for help, rather than their path to success being filled with ups and downs, stops and starts. Nonprofits can help smooth that long and tough journey to prosperity. For example, if a child is hungry at school, the National School Lunch Program, which is supported by the census, can provide them with free and healthy midday meal. But what happens when school lets out and they no longer have those readily accessible food resources? That's where nonprofits step in to provide take-home meals or set up after-school snack programs, hence how we fill those gaps or really build that bridge. Now, this helps visually represent what a low census count could mean for nonprofit services. If we don't accurately count all the individuals in our community, that means those resources for health and human services get smaller and smaller and further away from us. That once strong nonprofit services bridge can no longer fully cover those service gaps in our community, or it becomes harder for us to cover those service gaps. The needs of the individual didn't change, but the availability to the resource did, making it harder for us to meet those needs and for an individual to travel on that smooth path to success. Also, inaccurate census numbers really impacts our ability to do community research. If you're wanting to create programming that helps address hunger or poverty in the community, the census serves as the foundation or fundamental baseline to any community project. Understanding how many individuals live in our communities, their ages, their ethnicities, etc. The census doesn't just impact our philanthropic work, it impacts our future community and population work for years and years to come. And it's just not children that are undercounted in the census. It's so many other communities too. Individuals who are homeless are often missed, populations that maybe move frequently or move frequently for work, or folks who live in non-traditional housing, our elderly who reside in nursing homes. These are also populations that are often missed or not counted in the census. Here's a map of the city of Toledo and where our most hard to count communities reside. So I'll give you just a few seconds to look that over. See if you can find your neighborhood, or maybe where you currently live, maybe where a friend or relative lives. Maybe some of those colors and where they're placed might really surprise you. So I can't just tell you all this information without giving you a call to action. Hopefully on April 1st in 2020, you'll remember all of this great info and immediately take the census for your household, because again, it is so important. The other thing you can do is really think about how you can be an advocate for the census in the spaces that you're in every single day. Think about your workplace and how you can encourage your coworkers to take the census, or perhaps you volunteer in spaces where hard to reach folks live. Maybe you volunteer at the nursing home, perhaps you volunteer with your church's food pantry, maybe you pass out hygiene kits at the homeless shelter. Think about how you can chat with your company's HR or the staff at the place you volunteer and putting up census posters or setting out census information and just conveying the importance of this survey. Also, shameless plug, here in Lucas County, we actually have a complete count committee that is open for community attendees who are really passionate about the census. So if you would like to join or are interested, please email me. Hopefully this was an informative webinar for you all to be part of. It can be hard to really jazz up something like the census because, let's be honest with one another, it's not the most glamorous topic, but nonetheless so important for our community, for you and for the philanthropic nonprofit sector. So now we're going to transition and go on to questions. I know I gave a ton of info to you all, so please let us know if you have any types of questions for us. Okay, so someone asked a question about college students, which is also historically an undercounted population, because a lot of the times I've heard that college students or people in academia, maybe they are residing at school for 8 months of the year and they go back home to take the census, or maybe they don't take the census at all because they think they need to be where they grew up for the last 18 years to actually take it. But that's not at all true. One of the things I know people from the Census Bureau encourage is take the census on April 1st where you are currently located. So where you've been in the last 30 days or the last handful of months, again, especially someone asking about college students, if you are in college and you've been residing in a dorm or in some place like here in Toledo or at BGSU in Bowling Green, take the census and take it for where you are currently physically located at. So someone asked about the citizenship question. So literally I came into this room to prep for the presentation at 11 and a ruling came in from the Supreme Court. I don't know if all of you saw that recently at like 10:55, so 5 minutes before I walked into this room. I tried to do as much really quick research on it that I could, but it's looking like the Supreme Court did rule on the president's administration on adding a question about citizenship on the US Census. So one thing that was made really clear is that the Supreme Court, at least by the reports that I've quickly read and what I looked into and researched, is that the Supreme Court didn't necessarily rule that the citizenship question wasn't an unethical one to ask. They simply ruled against the administration's logic or their rationale behind putting the citizenship question on the census. So the individual that I was reading up on that was writing about this all unfolding said that that doesn't necessarily mean that a citizenship question might not show up on the census, depending on how fast the administration works and depending on how fast this could go back through the legal system. Really depends on whether or not a citizenship question could be inserted. I believe that the Census Bureau wanted that to be finalized by the end of July. I'm pretty sure it was the end of July, because again, they are doing some paper mail-outs. So to have that question present, they obviously need to answer to be able to do mailings. But with the census largely moving to a digital platform or being questions presented digitally, obviously that allows for a lot easier edits or for different questions to be inserted if needed. So there's not a lot of clarity on really what this Supreme Court ruling means exactly. I don't think anyone wants to for sure say that a question about citizenship is not happening and will not happen, because you never know how fast the legal system could or could not work, and you never know how fast people could want to move on something like this. So I think over the next couple of days, we're going to see a lot more information unfold on that. So it looks like I'm checking to see if we have any more questions. Oh, someone just came in with the last minute question. Yes, so someone said that they work for a university, to see if we're sharing this with some different university administrators. We have someone who has attended our complete count committee meetings from the University of Toledo, who helps with government affairs over there. So if you are an individual that works for the university and you want to be more involved or maybe help in sharing information about taking the census to your university or student population, feel free to join that complete count committee. Also, you can visit the US Census Bureau's website. They have a ton of information on like poster material, handout material, rack cards that maybe you could get printed and set out in key areas, like put up a poster in the student union, or maybe there's a student lounge somewhere that you can present info to. There's a lot of really great resources that they have available. So that could be an option as well. But this Lucas County Complete Count Committee is really open to anyone to join and sit in on. So I would welcome you to, again, you can email me to get more information on that. Maybe we can add you to meetings. But again, there's also a lot of really good resources on the US Census Bureau's site as well. If no one else has any more questions, I think we'll wrap this up.
Okay, well, that ends today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. To learn more about advocating for impact and why the 2020 census should matter to you, be sure to check our blog post that is written on this on our website. The webinar was recorded, and anyone who registered for the webinar, even if they didn't join us today, will receive a link to the recording and a direct link to the census blog post. And again, this will all be available on our website here shortly. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.